Hello there, my name is Simon, and I'll be studying one functionality of a peer-to-peer chat system, which is receiving message, and will explain how the functionality was analyzed and designed based on each UML diagram. So, first of all, the use case diagram, which is actually intended to represent the needs of users regarding the system. This is the main form to begin the system needs analysis phase of the system development cycle, which shows the actors, which are the user and remote application in this case, their interactions with the system, which are connection, chat, transfer file, disconnection, and the relationships between those main interactions of a system needs. I'll be focusing on the chat part in order to explain the receiving message functionality. We'll be dealing here with a sequence diagram that represents receiving message analysis. A sequence diagram is a dynamic diagram that describes the behavior of a single scenario. It's mainly used to represent interactions between objects, which can be actors from the use case diagram or instances of classes in the class diagram by indicating the chronology of exchanges. So as we can see in this diagram, we have three objects: remote app and user as actors and chat system as instance of class. The remote app, which is the first actor that will be sending a signal chat, that we can find it in the remote app class in the class diagram, contains two parameters: contact to determine who is the assigned user, and string, which is the message. After receiving these informations and comments, the chat system sends a signal rect message, which will transfer and show the message content to the targeted connected user by considering it as a parameter to this function. So here we're seeing the class diagram representing all the needed classes for the chat system. A class diagram is a structure type of UML diagrams which describes the static structure of the entities in the system. It's based on object concept, class concept, including attributes and operations. We're seeing a lot of attributes here in each class, each table, and different functions, which can be several types like public or private, depends on the symbol. And the association between classes. We have also different type of associations. What we need to focus on here is our main functionality, which it start all from the remote app interface, which is implemented by the chat network class. The chat network is connected to the controller by a simple association that contains new message function, as we can see. In its turn, it's connected to the chat GUI, where file is being refreshed, and we can realize that all the chat-based classes are connected to the chat system with a composition association that implies a relationship in which the chat controller, the chat network, and the chat GUI cannot exist independently of the chat system, which lastly is linked with to user interface, which is our last step. So in this diagram, we can assume that this is a sequence diagram, but with a lot of more details compared to the previous one. We have 5 objects here. The diagram resumes each interaction between each object. So to start, as we said before, we have the remote app, first of all, which is the first actor or the first object, sends a signal chat with contact and message as parameters to the chat network interface. In its turn, the chat network interface generates a message by launching the new message function containing same parameters to the chat controller's function. There, the chat controller will refresh the message, launching a function that returns only the message content in order to transfer it to the chat user interface. That will finally allow to display it to the targeted connected user who is the destination in this functionality. We can all agree that this is a chronological way, but we can recognize also that there's an interaction from chat GUI to chat controller and from chat controller to chat network interface. The simple explanation here is that after the user receives the message, which is the last step, the refresh message will return a response, which is in this case the parameter message content symbolized by an arrow in the opposite way, and only after this return, the new message function will return its response. Those kind of interactions are actually called synchronous, where the issuer waits for a response to its message before proceeding with its actions. And in the remaining cases, like from chat network interface to remote app, there is no opposite arrow, so it's called asynchronous. In this part of this presentation, we have a new type of UML diagram. It's a state machine diagram, which is included in the behavioral family that represents the different states of objects related to the events. We have the background, which is the start position. Then we have start listening function, which is present in the chat network interface as we saw in the class diagram. After starting to listen, we have different kind of options that could be selected, but what's important for us is the chat function. We'll be heading after it to new message function that concatenates the name of the user and the message string, which is the parameter into a single string with a specific format. And finally, refreshing this created string, allowing user to receive an indication. In this part of the presentation, we have the algorithm that concerns us for our main functionality, which is receiving message. We have, first of all, send hello function. It's actually in order to start listening, so an option can be selected. In our case, it will be the chat option. The second one is the new message function, which is defining a format for the to be received message by merging nickname of sender with the message content into one string. And lastly, the refresh function, which outputs it to the user. Thank you for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed my video.